Arizona is at the forefront of dealing with domestic violence in connection with risk assessment. We have a statistically validated, evidence-based instrument that is scientifically supported so that the courts have a reasonable basis to rely upon it in making decisions with regards to conditions of release.
The APRAIS assesses potential danger. We know that victims that answer 4 or more out of 7 questions in Tier 1 yes are at high risk of experiencing severe reassault within the ensuing 7 months from the presenting offense. But we also know that only 15% of victims who score high risk will actually experience that outcome. So when we talk with victims, we talk about the potential danger that they face because we don't know the precise nature of the danger that they face.
Dr. Jill Messing, a leading authority on risk assessment in IPV cases, validated the 7 Tier 1 questions of APRAIS, confirming them as the 7 most predictive behaviors of future severe reassault within the ensuing 7 months.
The research that I did in Oklahoma to look at the lethality assessment program, which is similar to what we're doing here. So we have, in the lethality assessment program, we have a risk assessment that police officers use. They screen someone in at high risk, and then they put that victim on a telephone call with an advocate. And what we found is that when police officers screen someone in at high risk and put them on that phone call with the advocate, that person was less likely to experience violence 7 months later. So they experienced lower frequency and lower severity of violence 7 months later. And they were more likely to take advantage of various help seeking available in the community. So they were more likely to do safety planning, to reach out for protective orders, to reach out to domestic violence services. And when women reached out for those domestic violence services, they also experienced less violence.
Tell the victim that this information is discoverable, that the suspect could find out. And just that piece alone, being honest with the victim and letting the victim have control back on even that one little thing that, I can control this, is huge. And it actually is a more effective tool when you're able to do that with victims.
It's a continuity of information that is informing you about the risk to this particular victim from this relationship, okay? One of the greatest obligations the government has is to protect its citizens. And when we have this information that we have, from the APRAIS model, we're better able to do that. I mean, there's no higher calling, I think, for a public servant than to protect its citizens.
What we like to ask our officers to think about is, if you had a loved one, a sister, or your mother, or even your brother, and they were a victim of a violent, intimate partner scenario, and officers from another jurisdiction arrived on that scene, what would you envision as the proper response for those officers with your loved one? What care, what empathy, what respect would you want those officers to show your loved one?
APRAIS can solve very few problems alone. We require these types of relationships with other law enforcement agencies, relationships with nonprofits, relationships with social service agencies and entities, particularly when you're talking about domestic violence. It's a very complex problem, and I don't think one discipline is the proverbial magic pill. We need that collaboration, and without it, we're just not as effective.
It's so important that the judges have the training, and that's now starting more throughout the state to give us the training about what went into these questions, because that was the whole thing about also during the pilot is, well, where did this information come from? How should I rely on it? Now that we're getting the training and getting the information about how they're validated, we're able to give a whole different level of authenticity and respect to that information than we would have otherwise. But just like with the law enforcement officers who are getting that training rolled out to them, we still have the same skepticism, and I can't imagine that it doesn't flow throughout the legal process from law enforcement to attorneys to judges. So having that assurance that there's some scientific basis is an important part of our willingness, and the Supreme Court's willingness to roll this out as a format to help aid judges.
The judges are seeing it at initial appearances, which is extremely beneficial for making recommendations for release conditions, bond amounts, that type of thing. And ultimately, the main purpose of this is to hook victims up with resources right there on scene when officers are out there.
With using this forum on all intimate partner domestic violence calls, we have a tremendous more amount of victims that we're referring to services.
That just kind of gives me more tools. Even if I can't make the arrest that day, it gives me knowledge, and I can talk to the victim and getting them further assistance, or making suggestions and recommendations and explaining why I can't make the arrest today, but this is what you need to do so we don't end up coming here and picking up a dead body.
Before APRAIS, a lot of those times we would just, pack up and walk away and say, there's nothing we can do today. If something else happens, call us back. But now with this forum, it gives us a tool to measure not just that day, but everything that's been going on in that relationship. And instead of just walking away, we can get those victims some services to see, to help them reevaluate the situation that they're in.